Indiana and Kentucky, a rivalry in college basketball renewed.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are now excited to be joined by Jacob Goins, host of the Locked On Hoosiers podcast, here with us to talk about the Kentucky versus Indiana rivalry. It is back and college football desperately needs it. Jacob, really appreciate you hopping on with us today. Obviously, this Kentucky-Indiana rivalry over the 2000s had some really interesting, fun games. I said on a recent episode when we were talking about the Hoosiers, I said, I don't even want to talk about the Watford shot. Let's move on from that. These programs in different spots right now. How do you feel about the fact that this one is back for college basketball?
Well, man, it's just so good for these two fan bases, most importantly, but B for college basketball in general, right? These are the types of matchups that make college basketball so much fun. You have them in football and you have them in basketball, but this one's been missing for way too long. And luckily, these two fan bases got the chance to see these two teams meet up in the Sweet 16 just a few years ago. But even that's been a few years now. And so this needs to be a game that's played, if not every year, at least every other year. And starting coming up in 2025, we're going to get to see it for 4 straight years. I'm excited about it, and it's what makes college basketball so much fun, Lance.
It's one of the best rivalries in all of college basketball. I think you can date this one all the way back to 1924. Indiana actually got off to a really hot start in this series. In the 2000s, though, like I mentioned, for Kentucky fans, it was pretty fun, mostly dominated by the Wildcats. Obviously, we remember that game in 2011 in Assembly Hall. What a big game that was for the Hoosiers. It split even at 2-2 over the last 4 contests. I'm excited to see this one come back to college basketball because, Jacob, like I mentioned, every time these schools seem to play, it just seems to not just be necessarily about these two individual teams, but it's just kind of a refresher as to what college basketball is about. And I know a lot of people really take a hard look at this regular season and say, well, it doesn't really matter what happens in the regular season. A lot of casual college basketball consumers will discuss the importance of the postseason and how they'll watch whenever March comes around. But whenever it comes to these special moments, whether it be early in the non-con slate, whether it be something for like Kentucky where they play Gonzaga right in the middle of the SEC schedule this year, doesn't matter where it's at. If it's in the regular season, you can always expect just an incredible environment. It's something that I love about college football. Just every single Saturday, you can see these big time matchups and just think about how important and how traditional some of these games are, despite maybe these programs not necessarily being so even at the time. So I'm thrilled that this is back for college basketball. And also, I just want to point out for Kentucky fans, Indiana won this most recent matchup in 2016, in case you had forgotten. Did. So Kentucky trying to reestablish themselves possibly with this 4-year series with the Hoosiers. I want to ask you this, Jacob. How do you feel about the fact that this is only, if I'm not mistaken, technically one home game for the Hoosiers? You got 2 games in Rupp, then you got 1 at home for the Hoosiers, and then you've got 1 at somewhat of a neutral site over in Indiana. How do you feel about the fact that Kentucky has kind of forced that onto this series? And if I'm not mistaken, Indiana's athletic director said that they may actually try and change that just so to make sure that they could get 2 home games for Indiana.
Yeah, when you look at the years broken down, this series starts in 2025. It starts in Rupp Arena, then it'll move to Indianapolis in Lucas Oil Stadium. Then it goes back to Rupp Arena, and then it finally comes to Assembly Hall. So it's exciting that this rivalry's back on the books, but Lance, we're not going to get to play in Assembly Hall till 2028, brother. That's 5 years from now. I mean, that's still a long time before these two teams will meet back in Assembly Hall, but it's really, really cool. I prefer home and homes. I prefer it in college football, and I especially prefer it in college basketball as well. And so it seemed like Indiana wanted to put a game there in Lucas Oil Stadium, being in Indianapolis, giving more fans a chance to see the game. I mean, we know there's a massive difference between most college basketball venues and Lucas Oil Stadium, which holds 70,000 people. Now, will that many people show up? I wouldn't think so, but hey, you never know. but I would rather it be an Assembly Hall. I don't care about the numbers. It is cool to see that many fans get to experience it, but when it comes to, I guess, fairness, right? Let's
Mhm.
play one game in Rupp, one game in Assembly Hall, and let's do 2 games in neutral site. Let's put one in Indianapolis and put one somewhere else. I don't know. I don't know what another, or put both of them in Indianapolis if you want to. It's just, yeah, you can scream that it's unfair. It is what it is. And if they do decide to move it from Indianapolis back to Assembly Hall in Bloomington, awesome. But Indiana's going to go. Indiana fans are going to travel. We know Big Blue Nation's going to travel as well. And so you could play this game in Los Angeles, California, Lance. The team and the fans are going to travel and make it a great atmosphere. So I'm excited for that. And really, what I look at in a matchup like this, outside of the historical factor and outside of these two legendary fan bases, what a great recruiting opportunity for Indiana and for Kentucky, for head coach Mike Woodson, and for, of course, Coach Cal. You have a chance to really show some of the biggest recruits in high school basketball that you want to be playing at these two programs. And if one program can dominate this 4-game series, that's a huge recruiting pitch in itself. So that is a massive part of this rivalry as well, Lance.
Absolutely. And you see these two programs cross paths on the recruiting trail quite often. In fact, we just saw Indiana and the University of Alabama in contention for Boogie Fland, who the Wildcats just picked up. So this could be a really good recruiting opportunity over the next half decade for both programs as they face off against each other. You won't just have the comparisons between the two schools, you'll also have the head-to-head maybe to discuss whenever you're sitting down with some of these high-profile prospects. I agree with you, actually. Whenever you look at the way that this series is panning out with only one home game for IU, technically, I much rather prefer, like you said, both in football and in basketball, home and home for these individual matchups. I understand why these neutral site things happen. It generates money. It generates fans, opportunity for fans that are not necessarily directly in the area to come and see these games. Also, if you're having it way away from wherever these respective schools are, like you said, playing it in Las Vegas or playing it over in California or something like that for a non-con game, playing it Madison Square Garden. I mean, you could absolutely see the way that could generate some positivity and some revenue for both the venues and then both for the schools as well. But I just prefer the atmosphere of the home games, man. I mean, if you can get these two teams inside the top 20 at some point early in the year, and you can get this one in Assembly Hall, or you can get this one in Bloomington, what an incredible environment that would be instead of going to play in Lucas Oil Stadium. Like you said, you got the opportunity to get more fans. How many of them are actually going to show up to fill out that 70,000? I'm not sure if it would be a much better environment than it would be at home for IU. Also makes it a little bit more difficult for Kentucky, I would like to imagine, if you're playing that game at home for the Hoosiers in their gym. So I prefer it for it to be home and home. I completely agree with you there. When you look at these two programs, Jacob, you've got a Kentucky team that has really struggled to hit the mark in postseason play for almost half a decade now. Coach Cal consistently, I think the word underperformed would be fair. I don't know if he would agree with that, but he has consistently struggled when it comes to getting the Wildcats ready for the postseason. What do we know about Indiana heading into this year? This is something that is a question that is allowing me to kind of educate my audience about maybe a team we're going to be seeing here in the very near future.
Well, this Indiana team, they are bringing back some experience, but they're also bringing in some really, really big talent. And the biggest name is Mackenzie Mbako, the 5-star, who has been in the headlines for the wrong reasons over the past couple of days and couple of weeks. But he is a really, really big factor on this team, and I think he may not be the go-to guy necessarily each and every game. I think your best player is going to be Xavier Johnson, who is returning for his 6th year playing here for Indiana in Bloomington, having some injury problems late last year. So Indiana's got some talent, but they're also flying under the radar and not getting a whole lot of respect when you look at preseason polls and maybe even talent-wise as well. But Indiana's going to sneak up on some people. And you went and hit the transfer portal and got a couple of big players there. So Indiana basketball is never out of it, Lance. And I think Indiana starting as low as they are in preseason polls, I talked about it on my show the other day, should Indiana be in that top 25, being outside of it, I think gives them a great opportunity to maybe surprise some people.
I agree. Ken Palm right now has the Hoosiers ranked number 49 overall. You could only imagine that that will trend upward. Some very difficult non-con games, though, for the Hoosiers,
Yes.
playing against Connecticut, playing against Auburn, Kansas. There are so many different names across college basketball that both these teams will interact with over the span of their non-conference schedules. Jacob, I want to talk about maybe some teams that we should be buying or selling in college basketball, just kind of taking a look around the sport in just a second. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you can pick more or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can watch the winnings roll in. It's really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. Prize Picks also has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes them the number one daily fantasy sports app. They also have weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday, one of my favorites. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discount select player projections up to 25% to add even more value. You need to go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That is prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use promo code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That is Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Today's episode is brought to you also by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. You can do things like add your job to the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. They also have really simple tools like screening questions to help it make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you would like to interview and hire. Small businesses also rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. It's really simple. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the qualified candidates you want to talk to, but faster. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, continuing along here on this crossover edition of Locked On Kentucky and Locked On Hoosiers. Lance Dawe, Jacob Goins hanging out here with you. Jacob, really appreciate you hopping on to talk a little Kentucky IU. Before we get to some major college basketball buying or selling on these programs, tell everybody where they can find you, man, as the new host of Locked On Hoosiers.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. And my first crossover episode here as the host of Locked On Hoosiers. You can find me on Twitter at Goins2Jacob. That's GOINS, the number 2, JACOB. If you're on YouTube, you can see it on the screen. Be sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube. Just getting started. First week is underway. And man, I'm just super, super excited, very blessed and honored for this opportunity, and really excited for the basketball season to get started. I know football's still underway, but we know this with Indiana and Kentucky, man, it's basketball season and it's right around the corner. So give us a shout, give us a follow, and you want to follow along all season long with Indiana basketball.
Absolutely. It's going to be a fun basketball season. That's what I keep telling my listeners, dude. It's about that time. We got exhibition games coming up. Right. I am looking forward to it. Well, we've got some major college basketball teams here, Jacob, that I want to get to. Buying or selling. Obviously, we'll talk about our respective programs later on this list, but I want to kind of rapid fire ask you about these individual programs, most of them inside the top 25, and whether or not you're buying or selling them this upcoming college basketball season. The first team I want to talk about here, the Kansas Jayhawks, number one in preseason AP polls across the board. You look at the Jayhawks returning quite a bit of experience, also landed Michigan transfer Hunter Dickinson. This is going to be a very, very talented team. Both the Hoosiers and the Wildcats play this team in their non-conference schedules. Are you buying or selling the Kansas Jayhawks this year?
Buying. Easily. Buying Kansas. They're out of the NCAA light. I think Bill Self, he said the other day, we're coming and we're going to press down on the throat. And you name the biggest reason why. They've got Hunter Dickinson, one of the best players in college basketball, easily buying Kansas this season. I don't know if they win it all, but you better believe they're going to be right there at the end.
Kansas Jayhawks, one of the best teams in the country right now. Really interested to see how they play against the Wildcats' third game of the season. Kentucky without some of their big men to start this season. How are they going to perform with Trey Mitchell at center? That's a conversation that we've had a ton here at Locked On Kentucky. Concerned for that game. I think I'm buying the Jayhawks this season. Like you said, uber talented. Hunter Dickinson's going to be great for them. Bill Self and co are probably going to be right there at the end of it when all is said and done. The Duke Blue Devils inside the AP poll as well, inside the top 5. Blue Devils going to be a really interesting team this year. Can they get a legitimate run going in the postseason? Jacob, what are your thoughts? Are you buying or selling?
I'm buying. I'm buying the Duke Blue Devils, and for a couple of reasons. I love Coach Shire. Duke extended him, and for a reason. I really, really like him. Young coach. There has been a little bit of bumps in the road taking over from the legendary Coach K, but I think he's got this program going in the right direction. They returned Filipowski and Jeremy Roach, two fantastic players in college basketball. I'm buying the Duke Blue Devils, who, again, just like Kansas, I think they're going to be there and in the conversation near the end.
Our first Big Ten team I want to get to here, Jacob, the Purdue Boilermakers, the number 1 team, according to KenPom, entering this year. We all know what happened in the NCAA tournament last year against Farley Dickinson. We all know what the message is from the national college basketball sphere is that we're kind of on fraud watch whenever we talk about the Boilermakers. Obviously, Zach Edey returning for this squad. Offensively, they're probably going to be able to be pretty efficient this upcoming season, one of the best in the country once again. But are you selling on the Boilermakers because of their lack of success in the postseason as of late?
Look, they have Zach Edey, who is one of the best players in college basketball, and he's returning for another year. Purdue, they're getting all the preseason love. You should buy this team, right? Absolutely not. I'm selling on Purdue. Do I think they're going to be bad by any means? No, absolutely not. They have Zach Edey. You can't be bad when you have him. But Purdue just hasn't been able to get over that hump. And there's a couple of teams on this list that we're going to talk about that are in that same scenario. I'm going to sell them on the Purdue Boilermakers. Will they be good? Yes. But great? I don't think so.
I'm going to be selling on them as well until they can prove to me. This is a similar situation with Gonzaga that I've had. I think you and I have had this conversation actually.
Yes, we have. Yes.
Until they prove to me that they can actually do it, I'm not going to pick them to do anything significant ever in the NCAA tournament. Yep. And it's just even when they have like the uber talented scoring 90 points a game type of teams, it's just like, okay, cool. You still haven't won a national title, so I will not be picking you to go to it. So teams like Gonzaga, teams like Purdue, I'm a little bit skeptical on. I'm going to be selling the Boilermakers. Another Big Ten team, though, that has just come out of nowhere, I feel like this offseason kind of developed some really strong recruiting and has now become a top 4 team in the preseason AP poll, the Michigan State Spartans. With Tom Izzo, they are looking really good on paper to start this season. Got some really young, talented players that they brought in there. Are you buying or selling on the Spartans?
Michigan State, as long as Tom Izzo is there, I mean,
Yep.
They've always got a chance, right? I mean, he's a Hall of Fame coach for a reason. 5th-year point guard coming back at Tyson Walker. Am I able to just pass on Michigan State? Am I able to just kind of walk by them in the grocery store and leave them sitting on the aisle? I'm not necessarily buying them, but I'm not trying to dump them off at the same time because I don't truly know what Michigan State's going to be. They always scare me, especially being in the Big Ten. They're always going to be in the conversation. But Lance, I'm gonna pass on Michigan State for now, so that way I can't get burned later. But I won't take credit if they are good because I truly don't know what they're going to be yet.
I'm actually right there with you. I think that there are some really positive things about this team, but also some questions as to whether or not they can legitimately put that all together in their in their conference schedule. Also, something I want to point out here: they got some really difficult non-con games. You've got Duke, you've got Butler, you've got Arizona, and then you immediately go into the Big Ten slate with teams like Wisconsin and Nebraska, who apparently is going to be improved this year. Baylor's on the schedule as well. So a lot of different really difficult teams for Michigan State early. Are they able to survive that with their 5th-year point guard and then also some of their younger talented pieces that they brought in? I'm not sure. So I'm right there with you on maybe I'll just monitor this stock for a little bit before I decide whether or not I'm investing in it. So Michigan State, a really interesting team that has made the top 5 of the preseason AP poll, going to continue to monitor that as they wade through non-con play. UConn, a team that won the national title a season ago, one of the most dominant runs in the NCAA tournament in its history. They've got a couple pieces heading to the NBA draft, but they also have some guys coming back. I'm curious to see if Dan Hurley and company can actually do it again, or at least get close to it. What do you feel about the UConn Huskies heading into this season?
Yeah, I'll give a quick answer here. I think Dan Hurley is a great coach. I think UConn is a historic, obviously, basketball program. Took a little bit of a dip, but I think they're back. I'm going to buy UConn. I think they're returning 3 major starters on that team, and that's going to help them. Experience is everything in college basketball. I'm going to buy the UConn Huskies.
Also believe they're going to have a pretty strong defense this year, just my opinion. Also, Ken Palms too. I'm going to be buying in on the Huskies. Not going to be putting a ton of money on them, but I am going to be investing. The Tennessee Volunteers, a team that has consistently been loved by Ken Palm over the past few years because of their ability to play defense. I've personally just not seen it in the SEC. They've continued to kind of fade out over the past couple of years in the regular season, then come on strong at different points in the tournament. Obviously, this past year, I believe, beating Duke, the previous year losing to Michigan in the round of 32. What do we feel about the Volunteers bringing back Zakai Ziegler and a couple of players that feel like they've been there for 20 years now? Are we buying or selling on the Vols?
I think the entire season, Lance, goes on how quickly and how effective can Zakai Ziegler come back for this team. He makes them go. I mean, that guy is overly talented. You hate to see anybody get hurt, but a player like him who's as talented and means as much to a team as he does for the Tennessee Volunteers, if he can come back and be the player that he was, or maybe even get better, then sure, Tennessee has a chance. But Lance, correct me if I'm wrong. Don't you still have to outscore your opponent to win basketball games, and you have to win games to win championships, right? Tennessee can't do that. They cannot do that. And so until they do, and same thing with Purdue, until they prove it to me in the postseason, I'm selling on Tennessee because I think the SEC is going to be a lot better this year than it's been in years past.
Yeah, just to make my fans happy, I'm going to sell big on them and just roll with it. Like
yeah,
you said,
you have to, don't you?
I am forced to. I just did a crossover with Locked On Vols earlier today, and I picked the Vols to beat Kentucky in football. I got to pick them to do something good against Tennessee in basketball. I think
there you go.
You're selling hard on Tennessee this upcoming season. You look at this final team before we get to Kentucky and Indiana, Jacob, and this one was one I picked out of the AP poll just kind of for fun. The USC Trojans, obviously, Bronny James, Isaiah Collier. Really interesting what's going on out there in LA with this squad. All of a sudden getting a lot of really strong preseason hype, not particularly shown in the polls, I would think, which is refreshing to see. But what are you doing with the USC Trojans? Are you buying? Are you selling? Are you touching the stock at all? Where are you at with this team?
That's one that I'm just gonna kind of sit back and see. And I'm not on the train yet, but maybe I'll hop on the bandwagon if they start doing some things in non-conference schedule. Great to see Bronny James hopefully being healthy with the heart issues that he had, the scare that he's had this offseason. Hate to see that. We know the media coverage around him is already insane and will continue to be crazy. But this may be the most anticipated season ever for USC basketball. And don't forget, Boogie Ellis is now at USC, and that is a huge name in college basketball. So I'm going to hold off on USC, but the minute they start winning, I'll admit it, I'll jump on the bandwagon and see where it goes. Absolutely.
I think that these games early in this non-conference schedule, Kansas State, Seton Hall, Gonzaga, Auburn, those are going to be 4 games I'm going to be paying attention to. They're playing on the road, by the way, against the Tigers there at the very end of their non-conference slate. How do they play in an SEC environment? That's going to be really interesting to see. But yeah, I'm going to be waiting for just a little bit on USC before I decide whether or not I'm buying or selling. They've got young pieces. They've got scorers like Boogie Ellis on this team as well. I'm just going to be sitting and waiting to see how the Trojans play it out, and then I will be jumping on this stock. The final 2 teams here, Jacob, I'll let you take it away with the Kentucky Wildcats here for just a second. Are they buying or are you selling on John Calipari and his squad?
Your listeners are going to hate me and probably never tune into my show ever again. But for the time being, I am going to sell on Kentucky and the Wildcats. I think injuries are the biggest issue here, Lance. I think injuries early on are going to plague Kentucky. And I'm a huge preacher when it comes to the non-conference schedule is so important for chemistry and for figuring out a true starting 5 and a true rotation. And so for now, Lance, I'm going to sell on Kentucky. Antonio Reeves coming back is massive, though. I will say that.
Yeah, Antonio Reeves coming back for this team. Also, Trey Mitchell, the West Virginia transfer, going to be plug and play there at center. I've said a ton on my show recently. Brace yourselves for these first few games of the slate because I like Trey Mitchell. Think he's going to do a lot of different things statistically for the Wildcats. I'm not quite sure if the rim protection is going to be there for UK against teams like Miami, against teams like Kansas. You're going to have some bumps in the road because of how young this team is overall as well, too. You cannot sleep on teams like Marshall in your non-conference slate. I think you need to be wide awake if you're John Calipari in this squad heading through this schedule until you get Ugonna Onyenso and Aaron Bradshaw back. I am not comfortable with this team right now. I am going to buy because I am excited about the talent that we have on this roster. Rob Dillingham, DJ Wagner, that may be the best 1-2 punch at point guard in the country. You saw Rob Dillingham drop 40 in the blue and white scrimmage the other day, and he's going to be backing up DJ Wagner. So I think that Kentucky's going to score in bunches this year, but I'm not quite sure if the defense is going to be there overall. I'm going to be buying this team, the Hoosiers. Talk me through it. Are we buying or are we selling?
We're buying, baby. Of course
Yes,
we're
sir.
buying. And it's because of the reasons I talked about earlier. Indiana has the talent. They've got the coaching. They're just not getting the love just yet. And you know what? That's fine. Xavier Johnson coming back is going to be the leader on this basketball team, the go-to option. I think possibly on both ends of the floor. People also forget you went and got a former McDonald's All-American in Khalil Ware in the transfer portal this offseason. And people kind of forget about that. He's kind of flying under the radar, plus Mackenzie Mbako, the 5-star freshman coming in. Indiana's got the talent. And if they can find themselves in non-conference play, while it will be tough, and they've got to play in the Big Ten, one of the toughest conferences in college basketball, I'm buying on the Hoosiers. And I think people are sleeping on Indiana this year. And I promise you, nobody wants to come to Bloomington and play in Assembly Hall.
I agree. Those two players right there in Mackenzie Mbako and Kello Ware are enough reason to say they're going to be better than their KenPom ranking, and they're going to be better than the 3 votes that they received in the AP poll. I'll be curious to see how they play in that non-con slate, though. I'm going to be really curious to see how Indiana attacks that. Jacob, really appreciate you coming on one more time. Tell everybody where they can find your content over at Locked On Hoosiers.
Yeah, follow us on Twitter at Locked On Hoosiers. Just look Locked On Hoosiers on Twitter and you'll find it. X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And follow me on Twitter at Goins2Jacob, Goins, the number 2, Jacob. We're covering Indiana each and every day. Exhibition game coming up on Sunday. Another one the following week. And then the start of the season against Florida Gulf Coast right around the corner, Lance.
Really excited for it, Jacob. Again, thank you so much for hopping on. Before we get out of here, though, guys, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. This season, you need to snap into the action over in the NFL with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So if you place a $5 bet, you can get $200 back in bonus bets. That's one more time. Guaranteed, win or lose. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action than now. The app is also really easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. You need to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off your NFL season today. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.
Welcome back into the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Goins. I appreciate you making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen each and every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. I appreciate Lance Dawe, host of Locked On Kentucky, and his time with the crossover episode today. And as we wrap it up, want to talk about Indiana basketball's exhibition coming up this weekend. Playing Indianapolis, it is an exhibition, and so what could we see in this exhibition? Well, here's what I want to say. Set your expectations extremely low. And I don't say that because of Indiana. I don't say that because of what I think Indiana is going to look like. I say that because it's an exhibition. And here's why you play these. It's early experience before you actually play real games, right? In case of a disaster, and you lose an exhibition game, it doesn't go against your record, right? Now, people can see it, of course, but it doesn't actually affect you in the win and loss column. It's also a really good way to get guys on the floor playing other people. I mean, think about it. We hear this all the time in football where these guys are ready to hit somebody else. Well, guess what? Indiana basketball and these guys are ready to play against other people. They're ready to shoot against other people. They're ready to defend against other people, and they're ready to run on other people. So that's what exhibitions are about, is getting your team some real game experience before the season actually starts. And it's also a really good chance to build a little chemistry, play some different rotations. And that's what I want to tell you, Hoosier fans. This game is going to be streaming on the Big Ten Plus. You can watch it, you can listen to it on Sunday, but you're going to see and hear about a lot of different five-man rotations. And just because you see a certain five playing together at one point in the game doesn't mean that's what's going to be correlated later on in the season. So I wanted to make that clear because this is the time to do it. Your first exhibition against Indianapolis. You've got another exhibition coming up against Marion later on before you play Florida Gulf Coast in the season opener. So while it is exciting that Indiana basketball is back, we will talk about it and break it down next week after it happens. Just don't take a ton away from an exhibition, because it is a time to really experiment with what this team is and what this team can be down the road. But it is Indiana basketball. And again, we will talk about it right here on Locked On Hoosiers after the game as we approach that season opener against Florida Gulf Coast. Well, thank you so much for tuning in here on Locked On Hoosiers, whether you're on audio, whether you're on video, on YouTube. Be sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Comment down below what other crossover episodes you would like to see in here throughout this season. The plan is to have different hosts from opponents that Indiana is playing. Excited to do that, but comment below on what other crossovers you'd like to see, your expectations for the exhibition, and maybe something you'd like to see as we move along closer to Indiana basketball season. Follow me on Twitter at Goins2Jacob. That's Goins, the number 2, and Jacob. And follow Locked On Hoosiers. That's LO_Hoosiers on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Be sure you follow us along there. Turn those notifications on as well. And I'll see you next time. Until next time, stay safe, Hoosier fans, and I'll talk to you later.